The message reached me while I was standing beneath a chandelier of warm gold light, holding a glass of sparkling water and smiling at strangers. By the time I finished reading it, my hands had gone so cold I could barely feel my fingers. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 31, and I restore damaged paintings for a living in Savannah, Georgia, which means I spend my days bringing wounded things back to life with a steady hand, a patient eye, and the kind of silence that lets every fracture reveal itself. I had always thought that skill belonged only to art. I was wrong. That night, it helped me see the cracks in my family so clearly that I could never unsee them again. The first text came from my mother. "We cleared out your attic studio for Owen. He needs it more than you do." The second came before I could even breathe. "We sold the drafting table, storage cabinet, and extra furniture. Do not make this dramatic." Then my sister, Lila, sent the one that made my stomach drop all the way to the floor. "If you want to come to the engagement dinner this weekend, act like family and send $8,000 for renovations. Otherwise, do not bother showing up." I stared at the glowing screen while the gallery around me kept humming with polished laughter. Crystal glasses touched. Shoes whispered across old wood floors. Somewhere to my left, a collector praised the restored skin tones on a 19th century portrait I had spent 6 weeks saving from mold, smoke, and neglect. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt as if someone had reached into my chest and yanked something vital loose. Then the fourth message came. "By the way, we already told people you have been unstable lately. Best not to embarrass yourself." That was when the room changed. Not literally. The chandeliers still burned. The paintings still gleamed beneath careful light. But inside me, something twisted hard and sharp. My family had not simply taken a room. They had staged a removal. They had emptied my space, sold my tools, demanded money, and started poisoning my name before I could even defend myself. It was not chaos. It was choreography. My attic studio was not some dusty corner I had forgotten. It was where I worked when deadlines closed in. Where I kept my solvents, brushes, linen gloves, and project notes. Where I stored letters tied with faded ribbon. Where I kept the silver hairpin my grandmother had pressed into my hand years ago and told me never to let anyone turn my inheritance into household clutter. That room held more than objects. It held proof that I had built a life with my own hands. And now they were treating it like spare square footage for my sister's fiancé. I slipped out of the gallery without saying goodbye. The night air hit my face like a slap, damp and cold off the river, carrying the scent of rain, brick, and old magnolia bark. I walked fast, then faster, heels striking the pavement in clipped, angry beats. My pulse was wild. My throat burned. Under the street lamps, Savannah looked beautiful in the cruelest way, all that elegance draped over the ugliest truths. Halfway to my car, my phone buzzed again. My father's name flashed across the screen. I did not answer. I already knew his tone before hearing it. He would be offended first, righteous second, threatening by the end. He would talk about sacrifice, about timing, about how Lila was entering a new chapter and Owen needed somewhere to focus. He would say I barely used the studio anyway. He would say family shared. He would never say stole. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. For one dangerous moment, I almost drove straight home, ready to burst through that front door and demand an explanation from every face in that house. But then another thought rose, quiet and clean as a blade. The house was never truly theirs. The breath left my body in a slow, shaking stream. My mother liked to speak as if she ruled that townhouse. My father strutted through it like a man born to command hallways and dinner tables. But the deed, the trust, the power behind every wall of that beautiful old place belonged to one woman. Vivian Hart. My grandmother. And as I turned the key and pulled away from the curb, I realized my family had made the same mistake they had been making for years. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had mistaken access for ownership. They had mistaken the daughter they could sideline for the woman who knew exactly whose name still lived beneath the locks. Vivian Hart opened the door before I reached for the brass knocker, as if she had sensed trouble moving toward her through the dark. She stood beneath the porch light in a deep blue robe, silver hair swept back, one hand resting on the frame with the stillness of a woman who had spent her life recognizing storms before the first drop fell. Her eyes moved over me once, taking in the evening dress, the tight jaw, the phone clenched so hard in my hand it looked almost fused to my skin. What did they do this time, Claire? There are questions that invite explanation, and questions that cut straight to the bone. Hers did the second. I stepped inside without answering. The house smelled like cedar, tea, and old paper. It always calmed me. That night, it only made the shaking inside me feel louder. I handed her my phone. She did not sit immediately. She stood beneath the lamp in the front room and read every message in silence, her face growing more still with each swipe. When she finished, she lowered the phone very carefully, as though sudden movement might break something already hanging by a thread. "Read them out loud," she said. My throat tightened. I did it anyway. I read my mother stripping my studio down to function. I read my father pretending theft was practicality. I read Lila naming a price for my place at the engagement dinner as if belonging could be purchased like linen napkins and floral arrangements. Then I read the last message, the one about me being unstable, the one already sent ahead of me into rooms I had not even entered yet. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. Heavy. Precise. Vivian crossed to the window and looked out into the dark garden, where the white camellias glowed like scattered moons. When she turned back, something in her expression had hardened into shape. Did Russell forget whose house he is living in? That one sentence changed the air in the room. My parents had lived in that townhouse so long they wore its history like their own skin. My father spoke from its front steps as if the bricks answered to him. My mother hosted dinners under its crown molding as though elegance itself had chosen her. Lila had grown up inside that performance and learned it well. But underneath the polished wood, the careful wallpaper, the old Savannah charm, the truth had never shifted. The townhouse belonged to Vivian. Not sentimentally. Not in some vague family sense. Legally. Completely. Years ago, after my grandfather died and my father buried the family in a mess of debt dressed up as business ambition, Vivian let them stay there temporarily. Temporary had stretched into years. Years had become entitlement. Entitlement had become theater. She moved to the secretary desk by the hall and opened a drawer I had seen 1,000 times but never feared. From inside, she drew out a slim leather folder. Property records. Trust documents. Insurance copies. Notes in her narrow, elegant handwriting. A warning letter drafted months ago but never sent. She laid each page on the dining table with the calm of a surgeon arranging instruments before an operation. I felt something shift inside me then. The panic was still there, but it had lost its chaos. It was becoming direction. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Mara Ellis came in carrying takeout, a charger, and the exact face of a woman already prepared to dislike everyone in my bloodline on principle. She listened once, asked no foolish questions, and sat down with us at the table. Then we worked. We built a timeline from the first message to the last. Backed up screenshots. Listed everything removed from the studio. The drafting table. The cabinet. My restoration notes. Client files. Sketches. Linen wraps. The carved stool from my first apartment. The silver hairpin from my grandmother. When I said that last one, Vivian closed her eyes for a moment that felt like a blade being drawn. Mara looked up sharply. They took that too, I nodded. She wrote one word at the top of the page in dark firm letters. Evidence. Then another thought slid into place, cold and ugly. One of the missing folders held my proposal for a private restoration commission from a collector Owen had been desperate to impress. My stomach dropped. This was never only about making room, I said. they wanted access. Vivian lifted her gaze to mine, and there was no softness in her now, only power. Then tomorrow, she said, they will learn the difference between being tolerated in a house and owning one. For the first time that night, I believed her. And for the first time in years, I stopped feeling like the daughter they could push aside and started remembering exactly whose blood was in my veins. We arrived just after 9, when the morning light was pale and merciless, the kind that made old brick look beautiful and rotten at the same time. My parents' townhouse stood in its usual place along the quiet Savannah street, graceful behind its iron railing, window boxes trimmed, front steps swept clean, every inch of it performing respectability. If a stranger had passed by, they would have seen charm, history, good breeding. They would not have seen the rot under the paint. They would not have heard the messages that had been sent from inside those walls with such casual cruelty. Vivian stepped out of the car first in a tailored cream coat, gloves buttoned at the wrist, chin lifted with that effortless authority money could imitate but never truly buy. Mara came around from the passenger side with a coffee in one hand and a folder tucked beneath her arm. I followed them up the walkway with my pulse pounding so hard it felt visible. Before we could knock, the front door opened. My mother stood there in a silk blouse the color of soft champagne, as if presentation could still save her. Her face changed the instant she saw Vivian. A flicker. Small, fast, but unmistakable. Not anger. Not surprise. Fear. "Claire," she said too brightly. "You really did not need to turn this into a scene." Vivian did not slow her stride. "Move aside, Denise." And my mother did. That was the first crack. Inside, the damage hit me all at once. My attic studio door stood open at the far end of the hall. Even from below, I could feel the absence upstairs like a pulled tooth. The house smelled of coffee, furniture polish, and fresh paint. Fresh paint. They had already begun covering me. My father was waiting in the sitting room with that look men like him wear when they know they are losing control but are still rehearsing dominance. Russell Whitmore had always mistaken volume for truth and confidence for ownership. He rose as we entered, shoulders squared, jaw set, every line in his body trying to say master of the house. But then his eyes landed on the folder in Vivian's gloved hand, and something in his face thinned. Lila lounged near the fireplace in cream trousers, arms folded, expression sharpened into annoyance. Beside the window stood Owen, handsome, polished, and uneasy, one hand resting on the back of a chair that used to sit in my studio. The sight of it there sent a hard clean pain through me. My father started talking before anyone sat down. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said. "We were trying to help Lila and Owen get settled. Claire barely uses that room anymore, and everyone knows this family has always shared space when needed." Shared. The word almost made me laugh. Vivian turned to me without looking at him. "Read the messages." So I did. I read every line slowly, clearly, giving each word the shape it deserved. My mother's dismissal. My father's theft disguised as practicality. Lila's demand for money. The threat to smear me as unstable before I could defend myself. In the heavy silence that followed each sentence, the language lost its family costume and stood exposed for what it was. Extortion. Humiliation. Control. Denise pressed a hand to her chest. "Claire, darling, that was not the spirit of it." "Spirit," Mara said lightly from the corner, without even glancing up from her notes. The wording felt pretty literal to me. My father shot her a glare. "This is a private family matter." "No," Vivian said, at last speaking. "It stopped being private when you used my property to steal from my granddaughter." That was the second crack. Lila pushed off the mantle, eyes flashing. "Oh, please. Nobody stole anything. Claire always makes everything sound dramatic because she likes being the victim when she is not the center of attention." There it was. The old script. I had heard versions of it my whole life. If I spoke, I was difficult. If I stayed quiet, I was proof nothing was wrong. Every road in that family had always been built to lead back to my silence. I looked at her and, for once, felt no urge to soften my voice. You sold my work table. You removed my client files. You emptied my studio without permission. Then you told me to pay for the right to enter this house for your engagement dinner. Which part would you like renamed so you can sleep better with it? The color rose hot in Lila's face. Owen shifted beside the window. His polished calm had begun to fray. Wait, he said, glancing between them, client files. I turned toward him. Yes. Client files. Proposals. Restoration notes. Professional materials from the room you were so comfortable moving into. He looked at Lila then, not me. I thought you said the attic was just storage. Lila's mouth tightened. It was mostly storage. No, I said. It was my studio. And you all knew it. My mother tried tears next. I am so tired of being painted as some monster when all we ever do is try to keep this family together. Vivian's eyes cut to her. Denise, spare me the performance. Women who hold families together do not auction off another woman's life in pieces. The room went still. My father rose fully then, voice climbing, anger rushing in where power was draining out. You have always been selfish, Claire. Everything has to revolve around your career, your schedule, your feelings. Lila is building a future. Owen needs a place to work. Sacrifice is what family does. I stood up so fast the chair leg scraped hard across the floor. Family does not erase one daughter to decorate another one's future. The words landed like glass. My chest was heaving now, but my voice stayed level, sharp, almost eerily calm. Family does not sell her tools. Family does not smear her name. Family does not charge admission to a dinner table and call it love. Even Owen looked down. Then Vivian opened her folder and laid a single document on the coffee table between us. You have 30 days to vacate the property, she said. My father's face emptied. For a second, I saw the exact moment the truth entered him. Not emotionally. Not morally. Structurally. The house he ruled was never his. The doors he weaponized were never his to lock. The daughter he believed he could corner had arrived with the one person in the family who did not bluff. Denise made a small wounded sound. Russell stared at the paper as if it were written in fire. Lila looked from him to Vivian to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in her instead of superiority. Then Owen spoke quietly, almost to himself. You told me this was already settled. No one answered him. Because by then the truth was no longer a conversation. It was evidence sitting in the center of the room, and every person there could feel its weight. I stood in the middle of the house they had tried to use against me, listening to their silence spread, and realized something I should have understood years earlier. They had never underestimated my pain. They had underestimated what would happen the moment I stopped carrying it alone. By sunset, the story they had built around me was already beginning to split at the seams. In a city like Savannah, truth does not travel first. Charm does. Presentation does. The right smile at the right luncheon, the right sigh offered over tea, the right wounded tone placed carefully into the ear of someone who enjoys carrying concern from one porch to another. My mother understood that system better than anyone. She had spent years dressing manipulation in pastel silk and calling it grace. Usually, it worked. This time, it did not. I was back at Vivian's house when Mara's phone lit up with a message from a gallery coordinator I knew well. She had heard that I was having some sort of emotional episode, that my family was worried, that perhaps I was not in a condition to take on delicate restoration work. The lie was so polished it might have passed for concern if I had not recognized my mother's fingerprints all over it. Mara looked up from the screen, one eyebrow lifting. They are not just trying to bury you inside the family, she said. They are trying to stain your hands where you work. A strange stillness came over me then. Anger, when it first arrives, can be wild and hot. But there is a later form of it that is colder, cleaner, and much more dangerous. That was the version settling into me now. Because suddenly the missing client files mattered in a new way. I went to the dining table where we had spread out everything from the day before. Screenshots. Lists. Printed records. Notes in Mara's sharp handwriting. One empty space on the table seemed to glow in my mind, the shape of the cream folder that had held my restoration proposal for a private commission I had been preparing for weeks. A wealthy collector from Charleston had been considering me for a delicate project involving inherited portrait panels, and Owen had asked far too many questions about it at Lila's engagement brunch 2 Sundays earlier. At the time, I had thought he was making strained conversation. Now the memory turned in my mind and showed its teeth. Mara saw it in my face before I spoke. What did he know? Claire, not enough to do the work, I said slowly. But maybe enough to use my name. Vivian did not react with surprise. She reacted with focus. That was her gift. She never wasted energy mourning a thing before securing the proof of it. She reached for her reading glasses, slid them on, and told me to open my email. So I did. There it was. A forwarded chain from 3 days earlier, buried beneath vendor confirmations and conservation notes. A client assistant had politely written to clarify whether Owen Mercer was affiliated with my studio, because he had referenced my proposal in a conversation about design consultation for the same property. For one stunned second, I could only stare. My skin prickled so sharply it felt like I had stepped into sleet. He had done it. Maybe clumsily. Maybe secondhand. Maybe with just enough distance to tell himself it was networking, not theft. But he had stepped into a room built by my labor and spoken as if the door had opened for him. Mara let out one low breath. Oh, that is ugly. It was uglier than ugly. It meant my family had not only emptied my studio. They had tried to turn my reputation into flooring beneath Owen's polished shoes. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. I nearly ignored it, but something in me had become unwilling to look away from any doorway truth might enter through. I answered. It was Mrs. Bellamy from 2 houses down, a widow who had known me since I was 14 and still sent me pecan tins every December as if I were perpetually recovering from adolescence. Her voice was hushed, conspiratorial, almost embarrassed. Claire, honey, I thought you should have this before someone deletes it. A minute later, a video arrived. Security footage from the side lane between the houses. Grainy, angled, merciless. I watched Russell carrying my drafting table toward a rented trailer with the swagger of a man moving his own property. Denise stood nearby, passing boxes forward. Lila laughed at something I could not hear. Then Owen came into frame, just for a moment, taking the smaller cabinet from my mother and loading it into the back. I watched it once. Then again. Then a third time, because pain has a way of asking to be verified when it becomes too exact to bear. The room around me went quiet. Mara's mouth flattened. Vivian removed her glasses and set them down with almost ceremonial care. Well, she said, now we have witnesses and moving pictures. The brutality of that sentence should have shattered me. Instead, it steadied me. For years, my family had survived on one assumption. That whatever they did to me would remain blurred by memory, softened by guilt, diluted by time. That I would explain it away before anyone else had the chance to see it clearly. But evidence has no nostalgia. It does not tremble. It does not try to protect the people who made it necessary. Then, as if the day had not yet finished peeling back every layer of them, Owen called. I let it ring twice before answering. Claire, he said, and for the first time since I had known him, his voice held no easy charm. I need to say something before this gets any worse. Too late, I said. A pause. Long enough to prove he knew I was right. I did not know everything, he said carefully. Lila told me the attic had been sitting half unused for months. Your father said the materials left up there were abandoned or old project overflow. I believed that at first. At first. The phrase landed like dirt. And after that he exhaled. After that, I knew they were not telling the whole truth. But Russell promised he could connect me to a collector through one of your ongoing proposals. He said you were overwhelmed and would probably be relieved if someone else handled the client-facing side. For 1 second, I could not speak. It was not the theft itself that stunned me anymore. It was the shape of their thinking. The smoothness of it. The way my father had apparently looked at my years of work, trust, and discipline and seen not a daughter, not a profession, not even a separate life, but an asset. A shelf he could strip. A door he could force open for someone else's convenience. Did you use my name? Oh, and another pause. Yes. The word fell heavy and wet, like something dragged from the bottom of a river. Thank you, I said, my voice so calm it startled even me. That is all I needed. He started to say my name again, maybe to apologize, maybe to save himself. I ended the call. The house seemed to breathe around me then, old wood settling, evening shadows lengthening across the floor, the last gold light thinning against the windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, a kettle began to hum. Life, indifferent and steady, kept moving. Vivian reached across the table and rested her fingertips on the recovered property records, the printed messages, the still open email, the paused image of my father hauling away my table. They thought they were removing you from a room, she said quietly. Her eyes lifted to mine. What they actually did was put every lie they ever told about you into the hands of people who know how to read documents. Something in my chest loosened then. Not forgiveness. Never that. Not yet relief either. It was something firmer. Something with roots. The feeling of no longer standing on the floor they had built beneath me. That night, just before bed, another message arrived from my father. Please call me. We can fix this. Tell Vivian it was all a misunderstanding. Do not ruin this for the family. I looked at the words for a long moment, the old reflex to explain flickering like a dying bulb somewhere deep inside me. Then I turned off the screen. For most of my life, they had treated my silence like a blank check. They were finally learning the difference between silence and surrender. My father came to Vivian's house 3 nights later, just after the rain had stopped and the city was still shining under the street lamps like it had been varnished. I saw him through the front window before the bell rang. Russell Whitmore stood at the bottom of the porch steps with his shoulders hunched inside a dark coat, one hand opening and closing at his side, as if he could still squeeze control out of the air if he tried hard enough. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not humbled. Not softened. Just reduced. A man stripped of stage lighting, left alone with the cheap scenery of his own character. Vivian was in the sitting room reading. Mara had just gone home. The house was quiet enough for me to hear the second chime before I stood. Do you want me to send him away? Vivian asked. I should have said yes. A month earlier, I would have. I would have hidden upstairs, let someone stronger handle him, then spent the rest of the night shaking with a guilt that had never belonged to me. But something in me had changed too completely for that now. No, I said. I will handle this. Vivian rose anyway. Of course she did. Some forms of strength do not step back. They stand beside you and let you discover your own. When I opened the door, cold air slid into the hallway. My father lifted his eyes to mine, and for one strange second I saw every version of him layered together. The loud man at the dinner table. The wounded martyr after every consequence. The father who could turn a room tense just by clearing his throat. The man in the security footage laughing while my life was loaded into a trailer. All of him was there. And yet none of it held power the way it used to. Claire, he said, voice already fraying. Please. Just hear me out. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door nearly closed behind me. Vivian remained just inside, visible through the glass, one hand resting lightly against the frame. Not interfering. Not retreating. Witnessing. My father swallowed hard. The movement looked painful, like pride going down in pieces. "This has gotten out of hand," he said. "Your mother is a wreck. Lila's engagement is hanging by a thread. Owen is furious. People are talking. You know how people are in this town." I almost smiled. That was still his opening move. Not what they had done. Not what they had taken. Not the lies, the threats, the theft, the damage. The problem, in his mind, was still exposure. "You sold my things," I said. "You let them smear my name. You used my work to try to buy someone else's future. And now you are standing on this porch asking me to rescue you from the truth." His face tightened. "It was not like that." I held his gaze. "Then tell it properly." The silence between us stretched thin and sharp. He tried again, changing tone the way he always did when force failed him. Softer now. Hurt. Almost paternal. "Claire, families make mistakes. Things get said when there is pressure. Lila is trying to start a life. Owen was supposed to have opportunities. Your mother panicked. Everyone was under strain." "No." My voice was quiet, but it landed harder than shouting ever could. "Pressure does not invent character, Dad. It reveals it." He flinched at the word dad, not because it was cruel, but because it sounded final. Measured. Like something I was using for the last time with full awareness of what it meant. He stepped up one stair, then stopped when he saw that I did not move. "Please," he said again. "Just tell Vivian we misunderstood each other. Tell her you overreacted. Tell people your mother was worried and exaggerated. I will get what is left of your things back. I will fix the room. I will do whatever you want." There it was at last. Not remorse. Bargaining. Not grief for what he had done to his daughter. Fear for what would happen to himself. And suddenly I felt something I had not expected. Not rage. Not triumph. Just a deep, tired clarity. The kind that settles into the body after too many years of trying to call cruelty by gentler names. "You want an explanation," I said. "Fine." I took one step toward him, and under the porch light I watched his face change, watched him realize that the daughter he had always expected to bend was standing in front of him without a single ounce of fear left to offer. "You thought I needed that house more than I needed my dignity. You thought if you locked a door, I would beg. If you took enough from me, I would pay to keep my place in a family that had already decided my worth could be negotiated. You thought silence meant weakness because it was easier for you than admitting I had been surviving you. You were wrong." His eyes filled. Real tears, maybe. Or maybe only panic rising too fast for him to hide it. At another time in my life, that might have undone me. It might have sent me scrambling backward through memory, searching for every decent thing he had ever done, weighing his pain against mine as if one had the right to cancel the other. But pain is not payment. Tears are not repair. Behind me, the front door opened wider. Vivian stepped onto the threshold, elegant and immovable as a carved figurehead at the front of a stormbound ship. "Russell," she said, "if you remain on my porch 1 minute longer, I will call the police." He looked at her, then back at me, as though waiting for some final mercy to rise in my face. None did. At the curb, a car door opened. Lila stepped out before I even noticed the vehicle had pulled up. Her hair was unpinned, her mascara blurred, fury pouring off her in hot bright waves. "Are you happy now?" she snapped. Owen walked out. "Mom has not stopped crying. You always do this. You always ruin everything when it is not about you." The old accusation hit the air and died there. I turned to look at her fully. For years, Lila had mistaken my restraint for surrender. She had worn my silence like jewelry, something that made her shine brighter by comparison. But that night, for the first time, she looked young to me. Not in age. In soul. Small in the way people become when they build themselves on borrowed ground. "I did not ruin your engagement," I said. You built it on top of my life and expected me to smile from underneath it. She opened her mouth, ready with another cruel line, another polished little blade. But nothing came. Because there was nothing left to hide behind. Not the house. Not the story. Not the role they had all assigned me years ago. Vivian repeated herself, colder now. Leave. My father's shoulders collapsed first. Then Lila's anger faltered into something uglier and emptier. They turned away almost at the same time, not like villains defeated in some grand dramatic ending, but like people discovering that consequence is far less theatrical than power. It does not shout. It does not bargain. It simply remains. Christmas morning arrived quiet and clean. No slammed cabinets. No tense smiles stretched over old resentments. No one measuring the table to decide who deserved warmth and who deserved correction. Just winter light spilling across Vivian's dining room, the scent of cinnamon and coffee in the air, and a peace so unfamiliar at first it almost felt undeserved. Mara came by before noon with pecan pastries and 3 terrible jokes that made Vivian sigh and me laugh harder than I had in weeks. After breakfast, I carried the silver hairpin upstairs to the small spare room where I had begun sorting through what was left of my things. I set it on the desk by the window, and for a long time I just stood there looking at it. Such a small object. Cool silver. Delicate teeth. A thing that could fit into the palm of a hand. And yet it seemed to hold the entire shape of what had happened to me. They had taken furniture. Files. Tools. Space. But what they had really tried to steal was my place in the story. My credibility. My inheritance. My right to say this was mine, this was me, this was done to me, and I will not pretend otherwise to keep anyone comfortable. I touched the hairpin gently and remembered what Vivian had once told me when she first gave it to me. Some women are not meant to be decorative, Claire. Some women are meant to be remembered. I think that was the moment the last of the grief changed form. It did not disappear. Betrayal does not vanish just because truth finally wins. But it stopped ruling the room inside me. It stopped sounding like a command. It became what it should have been all along. Evidence of where love had failed. Not evidence that I had. In the weeks that followed, I found a small studio of my own above a bookbinder's shop on a narrow, sunlit street. The windows faced east. The floor sloped a little. The plaster needed work. It was imperfect, quiet, and entirely mine. Mara helped me carry in the recovered table. Vivian sent over a lamp from her attic and pretended not to notice when I cried after plugging it in. That was the real ending. Not my father begging on the porch. Not Lila's fury unraveling under the truth. Not even the satisfaction of watching every lie collapse under the weight of its own evidence. The real ending was this. A locked door did not destroy me. A stolen room did not erase me. The people who loved me only when I stayed useful did not get to define me. They thought they were teaching me what happened when I stopped cooperating. What they really taught me was how beautiful life becomes when you stop renting out your self-respect just to be called family.